Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guests are Roy Silliker, who's the General Manager and CEO of the New Brunswick Construction Safety Association. We also have Johannes Doemer and Alan Brown, occupational hygienist from WorkSafe NB. Our topic today is silica. And the idea really for the topic came from Roy, who we had a discussion with on another topic a few podcasts ago, and he described it as the potential for the next asbestos. So maybe, Roy, just to get ourselves started, you suggested as a topic that we might want to do a session on, a podcast on. Tell us a little bit about why you feel that it's an up-and-coming issue, so to speak.
Well, being an old construction worker and having gone through the asbestos world and seeing the damages that asbestos has done 20-some years later, I really find that silica is a number one tool to look at because I see silica as becoming the new asbestos of this decade. The thing we want to learn is learn from our mistakes. And in the past, we didn't really do well with asbestos in the past. We didn't really present it well. With the silica, if we can make sure people have a good understanding of what silica is, what needs to be done to prevent silica getting into the system, I think that's where we really have to get going with.
Okay, so I'll put my first question, I guess, to Ellen, and that is, what is silica?
So silica is really just a very common natural mineral that's found in a lot of different natural substances and manufactured products, things like sand, rock, granite, cement, and engineered artificial stone.
So what are the health and safety implications if this isn't controlled?
So basically, silica, the invisible particles that are created from silica, it can enter into the lungs and cause damage, which leads to a few different diseases such as silicosis, lung cancer, COPD, or kidney disease. And silicosis itself is a chronic disease that is irreversible. There's no effective treatment for it, and it's progressive. So it continues to progress after the exposure to silica has ended.
When is it produced?
So it's produced when any of those products are manipulated in some way. So through like grinding, sanding, cutting, anything that creates dust. But it's the tiny small fraction or the invisible fraction of that actually causes issues in the lungs.
Now, Roy, you, from the point of view of the New Brunswick Construction Safety Association, obviously have a good handle on construction-related issues. What kinds of occupations would this be a concern in?
So basically, there's a lot of different industries that it really affects in the construction sector. So road building work is one, concrete work is another, landscaping, right down to landscaping because you're disturbing silica. So we see it big time in the road working industry with asphalt and the quarries and the gravel, masonry, anyone doing block work, concrete work, even with the demolition after the concrete or the cement has become concrete and is being demoed and we're tearing down a building, all of that dust coming from the concrete removal is going to cause silica dust to be in the particles in the workplace.
Now, have you had any feedback or much feedback from your customers or clients, people you deal with, relative to silica? Is it something they ask about?
Yeah, they do. And mainly the reason that they do ask about it is because of the way that the legislation is written, and you have to get testing for the dust particles, and the testing side of it is, well, it doesn't work for construction. I'll be honest. It just doesn't work for construction because you have to test the dust particles, but you're doing the job at the same time. So then you have to shut down your job for 2 weeks to wait for the test results to get back. And it doesn't do any justice to anybody, right? So, we may be over public or using over PPEing people because of the concern, but we don't know. So with this tool, that's why we're going forth with the Silica tool.
So Joanne, as an occupational hygienist, if someone calls you up and says, look, yes, I work in and around and with different products and silica is being produced, how do you measure it? How do you determine if it is an issue?
Yes. How do you determine if it is an issue is the real question here. And Roy alluded a little bit to this. So first of all, I guess what do we measure it against? Right? So we do have an occupational exposure limit for silica. So that is a concentration of the silica dust in the air that is believed, based on scientific evidence, to be, let's call it unproblematic for the majority of the employees. So as long as we maintain our conditions beneath this concentration, we should be good to go. Now, can somebody look at a silica processing operation, like cutting concrete, and at the silica dust cloud that you see, and determine, well, this is over our exposure limit, or is it under? If they can, please send them my email address and get them into our department, because that would be a superstar for occupational hygiene, of course. So in other words, no, that's not possible. You can't look at the process and say the individual is overexposed or is not overexposed. So we have to measure it. And as Roy said, it is a lengthy and also costly process. You would have to equip a worker who's doing that process with a filtering device, with a filter, where the respirable silica is being tracked. He would have to wear a pump. He would have to do his process for 4 to 8 hours, let's say, and then we can take that filter and send it to a lab. And the lab will do an analysis, and at the end of it all, the lab report will tell us, and then some math will tell us, well, this individual 2-3 weeks prior was overexposed or was not overexposed. And as Roy mentioned already, this is not a highly useful approach for dynamic industries such as the construction industry, simply because the workplace is so dynamic, changes so quickly, that task that was done a couple of weeks ago might not reoccur in that project in the same way, right? So even then you have that result, and I wouldn't call it useless, but you would need some subject matter expertise to interpret it correctly and use it to select the appropriate controls and the appropriate respiratory protection, for instance, for future operations. So, and that's kind of one of the issues with measuring it. Now, Roy also mentioned the legislation is requiring this, and that is correct. Our legislation says that if we have a condition where an employee or an employer believes we might be reaching 50% of the occupational exposure limit in airborne concentrations, then the employer has to arrange for testing. And certainly a silica dust generating process would fall under this. So as soon as you can see the silica cloud, you're pretty much there. And it's a cumbersome undertaking. And this is why we are also so excited about the silica control tool that we're going to be talking about, because it allows us to so to say cut out the testing and the measuring piece. The silica control tool does that for us, and we can talk, of course, in a bit more detail about this. And we, as WorkSafe New Brunswick, accept the use of the silica control tool instead of testing as well, because we do see it as a more feasible and cheaper and faster, actually, alternative to the classical approach of sampling.
Now, before I ask Roy about that tool and how it's going to be used, from your knowledge, are there jobs that I did some research the other day, and it lists off a whole range of occupations where silica is produced. Are there specific jobs that produce more silica where it becomes more of a concern?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, a lot of those occupations are in the construction field, right? When you're dealing with concrete, when you're dealing with brick, with mortar, when you're dealing with all those substances that contain silica. And as soon as you have do some kind of manipulation, as Alan pointed out, that creates a silica dust, you are at the risk of producing respirable silica as a hazard. Now, there are actually some occupations at let's say, an extreme high risk. Luckily, that's not necessarily happening in New Brunswick a lot at the moment. But we know from recent years, there have been studies in other countries, Australia, for instance, where individuals working with artificial stone or engineered stone. So those are essentially artificial granite or artificial countertops would fall under this. They have an extremely high silica content, and working with those creates a very high respirable silica hazard. And studies have, or other jurisdictions have seen cases of silicosis, which usually takes years and decades to develop, cases of silicosis which have developed after months of exposure. So extremely quick from an occupational hygiene perspective, extremely quick. And that is an indication of an extremely high exposure to respirable silica. So those are industries kind of outside of the classical construction, I guess, which are at high risk too. So industry are dealing with countertops or installers or manufacturers of those kind of products, especially if engineered stone is utilized.
So Roy, you are in the process, or you have purchased a tool to help in this process of testing? Tell us about that.
We're actually in the process right now, Pearlie. So basically, the Silica control tool was created by the British Columbia Construction Safety Association and some partners. They did all the research on the tool. They developed the tool. They put the questions into the tool to get the answers that you need for the tool. And then they opened that. Once they had that thing going in British Columbia, they opened it up to any of the Canadian Federation of Construction Safety Association partners, so which we are one of their partners. So Ontario has already taken the tool on. They're doing it now. New Brunswick is in the process. We're just in the final process to getting it developed and getting it going in New Brunswick. We had to change a few things in the tool for New Brunswick, which is understandable with regulations and so on. But it's quite an amazing tool. It goes in and it actually you give a job description basically, and it's a step-by-step job description of what you're doing, and then it gives you the controls that you need to put in place. Then if your controls at the end of the day aren't meeting the right requirement, then you have to go back into the tool and adjust your controls to make your controls better so that you get your levels down, right? Till you get them to the point where they need to be. So that's how we're going to. And then as far as measuring it, we're going to measure it of use of people. And the nice thing about it is this is a very expensive tool, Pearlie. It's about $190,000 over a 5-year period. And so we can't afford that. As Service New Brunswick Safety Service NB, as we are not for profit as well. So we don't have a whole lot of that revenue to generate. So we did receive $80,000 from the courts on a case that was put towards the courts on an asbestos claim. So it was alternative sentencing, which gave the money to NBCSA to develop this, to purchase this tool. And then WorkSafe New Brunswick has also kicked in and said we will pick up the remaining tabs. So really, we're going to be the holders of the tool, and we're going to be the direction for the tool. But the tool is going to be made available to every employer in the province of New Brunswick, whether they're construction or not construction. It's going to be made available via our website, which then links you to the Silica tool website and puts you into the membership status.
So people will be able to access this tool by going through that process.
That's right. As long as they have their employer number from WorkSafe NB, they can go in and put in their employer number. We have given WorkSafe NB has given that data to the tool creators to put it into the place so that you can put in your employer ID and it'll access you and let you do the process.
Okay, so we'll go back to Johannes here for a second. Do you want to describe a little bit about how the tool itself is used from an occupational hygienist point of view?
Yes, certainly. So as I already described, there is a requirement to measure for air contaminants when you have a process that might be problematic, and the tool is basically designed on this. So I described the way that classically we would get those measurements. The tool is based on a data set of, I believe, more than 5,000 data points of those data sets, really, that have been created over the years, spanning all kinds of work operations that involve silica, of course. So it allows the user to input the task that they are doing, the material they're doing the task with. So let's say you're cutting concrete. It allows you to indicate in the tool, okay, I'm cutting concrete with a power saw. I'm doing this outside. I'm doing this for 4 to 8 hours. And the tool will predict what the estimated exposure to silica, to respirable silica, would be when doing this process. And again, it does that based on a data set of thousands of similar measurements that have been taken over the years. And this is why it's such a great tool from an hygiene perspective, because even when we run through our classical approach of doing like 1 or 2 samples on site, by the time we get the results back, maybe weather has changed, process has changed, the results are not that meaningful. Whereas in the tool doesn't rely only on 2. It relies on thousands of data points. That's why the estimate of exposure is actually more accurate than when we would go outside and do costly sampling. Just from an occupational hygienist perspective, this is pretty nice. From a user perspective, the tool is also very nicely designed. You create an account, you enter some job site details, and then it asks you those questions. What task are you doing? Which material are you doing the task with? What tool are you doing the task with? In which environment? For which time? It gives you an exposure estimate. This estimate will already probably tell you that you're over the occupational exposure limit, so that you have to put some controls in place. There are very few silica processes, quite frankly, especially on construction sites, that do not require any type of control. So then the tool, and this is one of the aspects I like from a user perspective, the tool allows you to select controls to limit the exposure. And the controls, the way they're integrated into the tool is based on the so-called hierarchy of controls. So that's a concept that we use in occupational health and safety and in occupational hygiene quite a bit. It describes what controls are better than others in broad terms. And just to walk briefly through that, it's elimination of the hazard would be best, substitution, so using something less hazardous, second, then engineering controls, so something that we would physically put in place, then administrative controls, so changes to the work practices, and last and least, quite frankly, personal protective equipment. So in this case would be respiratory protection. So the tool walks the user through this and gives actually pointers, asks them, well, for instance, elimination. It sounds kind of silly, but, well, do you actually have to use that task? Can you do something else? Can you use a different material? And it asks those questions. It goes then into engineering controls and gives, based on the process you selected, recommends or suggests certain engineering controls that you can select. So maybe you can use water to suppress the dust. Maybe you can use an LEV, local exhaust ventilation system, to suck away the dust as it is generated. And it will allow you to select those controls. It will have actually information on how to use those controls effectively, which is also good. And it will provide another exposure estimate based on the controls you selected. So the user walks through this, selects the process, selects the controls, gets a whole bunch of information on the controls, which is great. It walks also through administrative controls such as training, isolation, etc. and then it will provide another exposure assessment. So based on this assessment, that's then your exposure with controls in place. Nice thing about the tool as well, you can see how effective the controls are. It actually gives you a percentage. Okay, you reduce the silica exposure by 47% or whatever the case may be. Then, based on this final exposure assessment, it will determine what level of respiratory protection is needed. And this is also very useful for the user, of course, because correct selection of respiratory equipment is not necessarily a simple task for most situations. And as Royce mentioned, often it results in overprotection because people don't really know what to apply and then go to the highest degree of protection they have, but not even sure if that's sufficient or needed, right? So the tool will then predict, okay, based on what you put in place, you will require, let's say, a full-face respirator with a P100 filter. And so it is very user-friendly. It is a step-by-step process. You need virtually no prior knowledge of health and safety or of occupational hygiene to use the tool, and it will produce a meaningful selection of controls for your process, which serve to really protect the health of your employees on site. From our perspective, what's also nice, it will produce an exposure control plan, it's called. So it will document everything it does. And it will put it all into a nice 10-pager approximately, with a short summary that describes this is the process that's being performed. These are the engineering controls, these are the controls that the user selected, and this is the resulting respiratory protection that we need to see on site. So that's a great tool because it can be used by the user of the tool to communicate this to the workers, to educate them, to train them. Can be used by us to actually come on site and check on compliance, and we can use the exposure control plan as a verification that compliance has been established, and as substitute to the testing that I mentioned prior. So it is really a great tool in our mind, and it's a great asset for New Brunswick workplaces and for WorkSafe New Brunswick as well, and for NBCSA. And I think, well, to put it in the words of New Brunswick's vision of making New Brunswick the safest place to work, this is a step towards making New Brunswick the healthiest place to work. As you noticed, probably, we're fairly excited about this and making about the collaboration with NBCSA to be able to bring it to New Brunswick.
So, Roy, you must be very pleased. This is certainly a very proactive approach rather than a reactive approach of sort of testing after the fact. So you must be pretty happy with it.
Very pleased, Pearlie. Like I said earlier, I mean, I lived in an asbestos world, and I've had many friends pass away 20 years later with asbestosis, and I don't want to see that ever happen to friends I have now in silicosis. So I think it is something that we can prevent and help down the road. It's a great service, and I have to say I'm very pleased that the alternative sentencing happened the way it happened. It happened on an asbestos case, but I am, and I know this is probably not politically correct, but I am a big fan of alternative sentencing because I don't like to see fines going back to the general coffers of the government in New Brunswick. I like to see them being used in the safety atmosphere, and this is what we're using this for. We're going to put it towards the safety atmosphere.
Ellen, we haven't heard from you for a while, so next question I'll pop up is how big an issue is it? Has there been much research done, or do we have much of a sense of how big an issue it would be here in New Brunswick or across Canada relative to, are there many cases of silicosis showing up?
So, excuse me. So in New Brunswick, we've only had 11 in the last 20 years through WorkSafe. But remembering that it does take a long time to progress. So that could be why. We could definitely see more in the coming years. But the cost has been close to $1 million for those, 11 cases. So it comes with a big cost because it is a chronic illness. But across Canada, so according to CareX Canada, 429,000 Canadians are occupationally exposed to silica. So it is quite high numbers of exposure, yes.
So I guess to conclude here, I'll throw it back to you, Johannes. More information. If a company wants more information on silica, where should they go?
Yes, they should come to us. WorkSafe New Brunswick website will be kind of the landing page and the start of it. As Roy indicated, we are in the process of launching this, so these resources are in the development. But we will have a landing page that will provide information on silica, on respirable silica. It will describe a lot of what we talked about today, of course, and it will provide the link to the NBCSA site where the Silica tool is hosted. As I mentioned, the Silica tool in itself does provide a lot of information as well on respirable silica, on controls, what to select, how to select it, how to use it. So even that is a very good resource. Running through the tool itself is a good educational exercise, actually. Can really recommend that. There's Roy indicated or alluded to this as well. We are, I think, the third jurisdiction that adopts the tool now. So that's BC. Ontario launched the use of the Silica tool not too long ago. I think it was in November last year. They have a lot of information also online. CCOHS has a lot of information on respirable silica. So we'll put that all together on our landing page and put useful resources there. Quite frankly, we're excited to launch it because I think this is an issue that respirable silica is an issue that should be at the forefront of planners when it comes to job site health and safety.
So, Roy, we'll let you sort of be the concluding comment provider here. I know you've already covered that from a point of view of folks will be able to access this tool. Just to repeat it for folks, if they do want more information on the tool itself or on silica, what all can you provide?
Well, we're same as WorkSafe. We'll have stuff on our website to direct them. Plus, one thing we're looking at, and I've talked to Eric about this and Johannes. We will be using the resources of WorkSafe to maybe do some educational training. So we may set up training locations around the province for people to come in and get a demonstration of the tool, how it uses it, and so on and so forth. And I mean, that WorkSafe is for people to help us do that. One thing I will note too, Pearlie, is because it's coming from BC, it is in English. We are in the process of negotiations right now, talking with BC to see if we can get the tool translated to French. So it will be coming up, whenever we roll it out, it will be in English only at first, but it is our mission to get it translated over to French. That's going to probably be a fairly costly venture for us, but we see the need, so we'll get it transferred over into the French language as well. Because of all the background, the information has to be translated. It's going to take a while, but it will be done in the future.
Well, look, Johannes, Ellen, and Roy, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate all the good information that you've provided, and we would encourage our listeners, if you want more information on silica, go to the WorkSafe NB website. That's a great starting place, and again, they will be referring you at some point probably through to Roy in the NBCSA. Thank you very much for appearing on our podcast today. We really appreciate it. And for our listeners, we always appreciate any feedback you'd like to provide to us or ideas for future podcasts. We're always looking for new ideas. Roy had mentioned on our previous podcast about silica. If you have an issue or a concern when it comes to health and safety or a topic you'd like for us to focus on, please send that on to us at podcast@ssnb.ca. Thank you very much and have a safe week.